For decades, it was rumored the Queen kept personal secrets tucked away in handwritten letters, some never meant to be seen. But no one could have predicted what was revealed inside a sealed envelope addressed simply, "For My Sapphire." What Sophie discovered didn't just alter her reality, it upended the royal family's silent hierarchy and ignited tensions that had been simmering since the Queen's final breath. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The envelope was found in the back of an oak-lined drawer inside Queen Elizabeth's private writing desk at Windsor, a space untouched since her passing. It was a chance discovery, or so it seemed. A staff member cataloguing the Queen's final belongings stumbled upon it. Unlike other correspondence sent to archives or sealed by royal protocol, this envelope had no date, no crest, only the trembling script of Her Majesty's hand and the haunting phrase, "Private," to be opened in the event of my passing. It was immediately passed to Prince Edward, who, pale and speechless, handed it to his wife. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, took it with shaking fingers, her heart thundering in her chest. It could have been anything. A farewell, a rebuke, a final expression of affection, or a warning about something far darker. Inside was not just a letter, it was a legacy, a personal declaration from the Queen herself, naming Sophie the heir to the royal sapphire collection. These weren't just jewels. These sapphires had belonged to Queen Victoria, passed through Queen Mary's hands, and worn by Elizabeth during some of the most defining moments in British history. They were never part of the crown jewels, never recorded in any official catalogue. They were personal, intimate, and powerful. And now, they were Sophie's. But with that inheritance came something Sophie had never prepared for: symbolic power that spoke louder than any title, and a weight that couldn't be shared. Alone in her private quarters, Sophie read the Queen's words over and over. The letter made no mention of Camilla, nor of Catherine. It spoke only of duty, of grace under fire, and of the trust one woman passes to another when she believes the legacy of queenship lies not in blood, but in character. Sophie wept quietly, privately, as always. The decision to accept this inheritance was not easy. She knew that revealing the letter would invite scrutiny, jealousy, and the wrath of those who considered themselves more entitled. But hiding it would mean denying the Queen's last request. It was an impossible choice, and time was running out. What the public didn't know was that the sapphires were more than a private gift. They were a coded statement, a message from the Queen to those within the inner circle of the monarchy, that Sophie, once overlooked, once underestimated, was now chosen. But as Sophie struggled to process the meaning of the Queen's words, the halls of Buckingham Palace had already begun to whisper, and the wrong ears had heard just enough to spark a storm. The public saw them as glittering accessories. What they never knew was that the royal sapphire collection was more than just heirlooms. It was a hidden cipher passed from one sovereign woman to another. But why Sophie? And what did this collection truly represent within the monarchy's secret code of inheritance? Behind the velvet curtains and polished protocol, the sapphires were not merely objects of beauty. They were symbols of royal intention. Many of the pieces had never seen the light of public engagements. They remained locked away in the deepest corners of the royal vault, catalogued only in private ledgers and, according to whispered accounts, a personal notebook the Queen herself maintained. Known among a tight circle as the Sapphire Diary, this hidden journal allegedly traced the origin, sentiment, and purpose behind each jewel, when it was worn, why and for whom it was meant. Insiders claim Queen Elizabeth used it not just to preserve royal history, but to encode her silent decisions about the women who would continue her legacy, not through titles, but through quiet power. This wasn't without precedent. In 1936, when Wallis Simpson threatened the crown, Queen Mary ordered the sapphires sealed. They were deemed sacred, inaccessible to anyone who had not earned the monarchy's trust. Decades later, when Camilla entered the royal sphere, similar decisions were made. While she received other jewels and eventually the Queen Mother's coronation crown, the sapphires remained off limits. Elizabeth's unspoken message was clear. Some legacies are not transferred by rank, but by merit, by restraint, by silent endurance, and Elizabeth was nothing if not deliberate. Her use of jewellery had long been decoded by press and palace staff alike. A brooch in wartime, a tiara during political strain, each pie. CE was a chess move. But it was the sapphires that remained unreadable, used only at pivotal moments. When the Windsor family fractured under Diana's shadow, Elizabeth wore them. When Prince Andrew's scandals exploded, she retrieved them again. Never making statements, always sending signals. To give these to Sophie wasn't a gesture. It was a verdict, a statement of faith in a woman who had walked quietly beside the royal family for decades, absorbing chaos, shielding Edward from scrutiny, and carrying burdens without spectacle. Sophie had never demanded a spotlight, and that was precisely why she was handed the weight of a private crown, one made of sapphire, but forged in sacrifice. Suddenly, the Queen's decision to choose Sophie wasn't about favoritism or affection. It was about continuity, not the kind seen in official ceremonies, but the kind passed down through generations of women who bore the royal burden with silent grace. In a monarchy ruled publicly by men, these jewels formed an unbroken matrilineal chain of judgment, power, and quiet resolve. And now, that chain rested on Sophie's shoulders. As the truth about the sapphire's power emerged, the choice of Sophie became far more than sentimental. It became political, and not everyone was ready to accept the Queen's hidden decree. When word leaked that Sophie had been chosen, it wasn't Sophie's reaction that shook the palace. It was Catherine's silence and Camilla's explosive response. For two women on either end of royal destiny, the Queen's letter struck a nerve that couldn't be soothed with royal protocols. Catherine said nothing at first. No statement, no visible reaction, no whisper to the press. Just a measured nod when approached about the news, a gesture so controlled it left royal insiders stunned. Was it a quiet show of solidarity, or the calm before a calculated storm? With Catherine, silence was never just silence, it was strategy. And as her stillness lingered, tension rose like mist on the palace grounds. Meanwhile, in another corner of the royal house, chaos erupted. Camilla, blindsided and reportedly furious, demanded an immediate explanation from King Charles. Witnesses described a closed-door confrontation in which voices were raised, fists pounded against wood, and the words betrayal and embarrassment echoed through the corridor. Camilla had fought for decades to be accepted as queen. For her, this letter felt like an insult wrapped in velvet, an intentional dismissal of her sacrifices, and a brutal reminder that she had never truly worn Elizabeth's crown in spirit. Old insecurities clawed their way back to the surface. For Camilla, it was the shadow of Diana that never lifted, now joined by the ghost of Elizabeth's final decision. For Catherine, it was subtler, the pressure of constant comparisons, the expectation that she would eventually inherit everything. And yet, Elizabeth's choice bypassed both of them. It went to Sophie, the quiet one, the overlooked one, the woman who had never asked for centre stage. The palace, always so polished, now found itself gripped by an invisible fracture. Sophie had become the symbol of something bigger than herself, and the weight of it began to crush her from within. Caught between two royal titans and a nation of watchful eyes, Sophie was visibly shaken. She confided only in Edward at first, but even that couldn't quiet the storm in her chest. According to sources close to the inner circle, Prince William reached out in private, an unprecedented move. Some say he offered his support. Others suggest the conversation carried a different tone, one more warning than welcome. Not everyone will understand this, he may have said. Or worse, be careful who you trust. Whatever was said, Sophie emerged from the meeting more reserved than ever, her eyes darting, her posture stiffened, as if she now knew the battle wasn't over, it had just begun. And then there was Charles, the monarch himself, silent, watching. Was he blindsided by the Queen's letter like everyone else? Or had he known all along and chosen to say nothing, allowing the chaos to unfold unchecked? His inaction raised more questions than it answered. Some insiders believe he saw the letter before the Queen's passing but chose to bury it quietly, hoping it would never resurface. Others argue he never saw it at all and was now scrambling to contain a legacy that threatened to overshadow his own reign. Either way, the result was the same: a palace on edge, a duchess at the centre, and a queen's final wish hanging in the balance. But while palace drama brewed in whispers and glares, one figure re-entered the frame holding knowledge that could dismantle the queen's final wish altogether. When Princess Anne confronted Sophie behind closed doors, it wasn't curiosity, it was conviction. "This wasn't meant for you," she allegedly said. But what did Anne mean? And why was she so certain that the Queen's final personal letter had missed its mark? Anne had always been known as the silent pillar of the royal family, the one who never flinched under scrut. Never demanded headlines, and never strayed from duty. She had walked behind her mother for 70 years, not in shadow but in step. Among palace staff and senior aides, Anne was viewed as the Queen's mirror image. No nonsense, disciplined, unshaken. So when news of the Sapphire letter reached her, it wasn't shock, she felt it was betrayal. For Anne, the sapphires represented something far more sacred than inheritance. They symbolized lineage, not by blood alone, but by sacrifice. And by every measure of loyalty, endurance, and tradition, she believed she had earned them. So when Sophie Edward's quiet wife, often seen but rarely heard, was named as heir to that legacy, Anne saw it as a violation, not a gesture. The confrontation happened in silence, beyond cameras, beyond advisors, just the two women and decades of buried tension. Anne reportedly accused Sophie of misunderstanding the letter's meaning, even suggesting that the document may have been misdirected, or worse, tampered with. Her tone wasn't cruel but cutting. She didn't shout, Anne never needed to. Her words, laced with sharp precision, cut through Sophie like glass. She never said your name in the context of succession, Anne allegedly insisted. Not for the sapphires, not for anything that mattered. She reminded Sophie of past conversations, subtle gestures, unfinished thoughts, moments that, in Anne's view, confirmed that the Queen had always intended her eldest daughter to carry the symbolic flame, not a daughter-in-law, no matter how dutiful. The wounds were not new. There had always been an invisible fault line between Anne and Sophie. It began shortly after Sophie married Edward, when whispers in the palace hinted at the Queen's growing admiration for her. Anne, who had sacrificed marriage, motherhood, and personal freedom for the Crown's mission, watched as Sophie, seemingly without struggle, became a quiet favourite. The Queen had never said it aloud, but the difference in how she treated Sophie was noticed. Anne had ignored it then, but now, with the letter as proof, it became too much to ignore. This wasn't just about sapphires, it was about a lifetime of unspoken rivalry, suddenly made public. Sophie was left shattered. She entered the room uncertain and left broken. That night, she reportedly asked Edward if the Queen had ever expressed anything directly to him about the sapphires. His silence only deepened her despair. The weight of the letter, once seen as a crown of honour, now felt like a curse. Did she truly deserve it? Or had she simply been a placeholder for something or someone else? For the first time, Sophie considered locking the letter away permanently, never speaking of it again. But deep down, she knew that silence would not stop what had already begun. Yet while Anne fought to reclaim what she believed rightfully hers, an entirely different threat began to take shape, one that would weaponize the Queen's letter for darker ambitions. Royal secrets are rarely leaked by accident. When an anonymous source slipped excerpts of the Queen's letter to a tabloid, the public exploded, but inside the palace, panic gripped the corridors. Someone wanted to burn Sophie's gift before it could ever be worn. The leak was precise, deliberate, and chilling in its timing. Just as tensions within the royal household were peaking, an obscure but aggressively distributed tabloid published what it claimed were portions of Queen Elizabeth's handwritten letter to Sophie. But anyone who had seen the real document immediately noticed something was off. Key phrases were missing, sentences were cropped, and the most critical section, the line in which the Queen named Sophie as heir to the Sapphire collection, was reduced to vague sentiment, stripped of its direct intention. The leak had been edited, not to clarify, but to cloud. It was sabotage dressed as transparency, and its effect was immediate. Only a handful of individuals had ever seen the original letter. That list included King Charles, Prince Edward, and two members of the Queen's personal staff, who had helped manage her estate in her final days. It also included 3 senior aides, all of whom had signed confidentiality agreements. But somewhere in that tight, trusted circle, loyalty had cracked. The question wasn't just who leaked it, it was why. Was it an act of revenge? A political play to delegitimize Sophie's elevation? Or a warning to the rest of the palace that even a queen's last words could be weaponized? Suspicion turned inward quickly. Camilla's office was the first to face scrutiny, not because of evidence, but because of motive. The Queen's decision had undermined her position more than anyone else's, and the leak conveniently softened the narrative before it could gain royal sanction. But there was no direct proof. Just silence, nervous glances, and one senior staffer who abruptly took leave. Meanwhile, Catherine's circle, often seen as tactically reserved, remained disturbingly quiet. No denials, no statements, no leaked sympathy. Just a calm void that spoke volumes. Outsea. Day the palace, the reaction was fierce and immediate. Public opinion shifted in a matter of hours. Sophie, once a quiet figure in the background, became a sympathetic heroine overnight. Online forums, newspapers, and morning shows erupted with commentary, some praising the Queen's choice, others questioning the secrecy of it all. And yet, for the monarchy itself, the leak was an earthquake. The Royal Communications Office was blindsided, forced into emergency meetings to decide how much of the truth could be safely acknowledged without exposing deeper rifts. The damage control was swift, but not swift enough. The leak had done its job. It had taken a private, sacred inheritance and thrust it into the pit of public debate. What should have been a quiet passing of symbolic power was now a contested headline. Sophie's name trended for all the wrong reasons, and the original meaning of the letter, the quiet trust between 2 royal women, was reduced to fragments on a page. But while the public was distracted by the leak, Sophie was forced to face a ghost from her past, someone who warned her that accepting the sapphires could come at a devastating cost. Sophie wasn't the only one who had read a private letter. Prince Edward quietly revealed he had received his own handwritten message from the Queen months earlier, and in it a cryptic line now haunted him: "Tell her only if they turn on her." Had the Queen foreseen the chaos her sapphires would unleash? The revelation came in a moment of silence. After days of escalating tension and emotional strain, Sophie had reached her limit, torn between loyalty and fear, honor and humiliation. It was then, and only then, that Edward spoke. Shaking hands, he retrieved a letter he had kept hidden since shortly after the Queen's funeral. He hadn't understood it at the time. It felt poetic, sentimental, an expression of maternal love, rather than a roadmap to catastrophe. But now, as the palace unraveled, those words struck him like a warning. Tell her only if they turn on her. The Queen had seen it coming. She'd known the sapphires would stir resentment. She'd known Sophie would be questioned, tested, even targeted. And in her final gesture, she had armed Edward with a truth too dangerous to reveal, unless the world around them fractured. And now it had. Edward's guilt was overwhelming. He had kept the letter hidden, even as Sophie faced scorn from Camilla, skepticism from Anne, and silence from Catherine. He had watched her unravel slowly, whispering reassurances while withholding the one message that could have changed everything. His intention had been protection. But what if, in his silence, he had allowed the palace to eat her alive? As he handed her the Queen's second letter, his voice broke, not with emotion, but with shame. And Sophie, holding the page, finally saw what her mother-in-law had understood long before anyone else did. This wasn't about jewelry. This was about survival. The Queen's letter didn't name names, but it painted shadows clearly enough. Legacy, she wrote, isn't always preserved by those closest to the crown. Sometimes it rests on the shoulders of those least expected to carry it. It was both a benediction and a burden. Sophie felt a strange blend of comfort and horror as she read it. The Queen hadn't just chosen her, she had anticipated the betrayal that would follow. And that knowledge, while empowering, also stripped away any illusion of safety. The monarchy was not just a family, it was a battlefield. And Sophie had been chosen to stand at its centre, armed with nothing but a string of sapphires and the whispered trust of a woman now gone. Edward vowed from that moment forward to protect her, whatever that meant. Titles, duties, legacy. None of it mattered more than the woman the Queen had trusted when no one else dared. But it wouldn't be Edward's protection that saved Sophie. It would be an unexpected hand extended from a surprising source, with a deal too dangerous to ignore. Late one evening, Catherine summoned Sophie for a private meeting. No staff, no titles, just two women, seated across from one another, discussing what no royal man could understand the weight of being chosen. But was this an alliance, or a veiled warning? The room was quiet, heavy with history, and even heavier with expectation. Catherine didn't begin with pleasantries. Her voice was steady, deliberate, stripped of ceremony, but steeped in meaning. "The Queen chose you," she said, "and now so will they, or they'll break you." There was no envy in her tone, but there was something deeper and understanding, forged not through bitterness but survival. Catherine had lived through storms. She knew what it meant to be admired publicly and scrutinized privately. And now, looking across at Sophie, she saw someone on the brink of being consumed by the same unrelenting machinery. Catherine didn't question the Queen's choice. In fact, she acknowledged it with a rare bluntness. But what followed was unexpected. She laid out a vision, a future where the sapphires weren't seen as a dividing line between royal women, but as a unifying symbol. Two women carrying two versions of the Queen's legacy, one by bloodline, one by character. She spoke of public appearances, subtle gestures, and the importance of shaping the narrative before others distorted it. "Wear them first when they expect you not to," she advised. Not in defiance, but in control. It was strategic, measured, almost rehearsed, but beneath the poised delivery there was tension unspoken but unmistakable, a current of rivalry neither woman wanted to name. For Catherine, this was a test. Could Sophie navigate the storm without becoming a pawn in someone else's game? For Sophie, it was a moment of revelation. Catherine was extending her hand, yes, but she was also drawing a line in the sand. Not a threat, something subtler, a message wrapped in civility. "You may have the Queen's sapphires, but I am still the future Queen." When Sophie left the room that night, she felt no clearer than when she entered. Catherine hadn't demanded anything. She hadn't undermined her. But she had marked the beginning of something new, a quiet pact, perhaps, or a power play disguised as sisterhood. Either way, Sophie now understood the stakes. She wasn't just wearing the Queen's final gift. She was carrying a target. But just as Sophie prepared to step forward into the Queen's light, a shadow from Elizabeth's past rose to challenge everything, even the letter's authenticity. She served the Queen in silence for over 0 years, guarding secrets, watching history unfold behind closed doors. But now, in a whisper that carried the weight of generations, the Queen's former lady-in-waiting stepped forward with her own truth about the sapphires, and the letter that started it all. Her name, kept hidden for her own safety, was never made public. She didn't speak to the press. She didn't write a memoir. She made a single confidential disclosure to a trusted intermediary, one that would alter the entire understanding of the Queen's final act. According to her, the letter to Sophie was not the only one. In fact, there were three. 3 letters, each sealed in identical cream-coloured envelopes, each bearing the Queen's own hand. One addressed to Catherine, one to Anne, and one, unmistakably, to Sophie. She called them the Queen's final offerings, a last gesture from a monarch who had always believed in the power of symbolism, but who, in the twilight of her reign, had become haunted by the silence her choices would leave behind. The former lady-in-waiting revealed that the Queen had been deeply unsettled during her final months. The question of succession wasn't just political, it was personal. It wasn't about titles, but legacy. And in her own private way, Elizabeth had tried to prepare for all outcomes. The sapphires, though never publicly acknowledged as such, had become the centerpiece of her silent succession plan. 1 set of jewels, 3 potential heirs. Each woman represented a different path forward. Catherine, the future Queen consort, Anne, the embodiment of royal discipline, and Sophie, the quiet soul who had never expected anything, yet had become everything to her in those final years. The lady-in-waiting insisted that the Queen had never made a definitive choice, that in a rare moment of humility she left the decision to fate. The letters were stored separately, not together. They were hidden in different locations, entrusted to different hands. It was never announced which was to be found first. The Queen knew the chaos that might follow, but she also knew the danger of silence. So she wrote to each, offering words tailored not to position but to character. And in the end, it was Sophie's letter that surfaced first. Not because it was meant to, but because the universe or the corridors of Windsor willed it so. This revelation struck the heart of the monarchy like lightning, because now the question wasn't simply what the Queen had written, but why Sophie's letter was the one chosen by time. Was it divine timing? Was it manipulation? Or was it the Queen's quiet test to see which of the three women would step forward, not with entitlement, but with grace? That haunting ambiguity is what now loomed over Sophie's every move. If she had been chosen by chance, was she truly chosen at all, or did the crown rest uneasily on her shoulders because no one else dared to claim it? But no matter the origin, the world had already seen the letter, and the crown's decision now rested not in hidden vaults, but in the hands of those brave enough to wear what it truly meant. In a private, quiet ceremony witnessed by only a select few, Duchess Sophie accepted the Queen's sapphires, not as jewellery but as a burden. And as she clasped the cold blue stones around her neck, a hush fell over the room. For in that moment, Sophie wasn't just wearing a gift, she was carrying a legacy. It wasn't announced. There was no official press release, just a sudden, subtle appearance at a state reception, a ribbon of deep navy, a neckline that shimmered with unmistakable royal blue fire, and a presence that had shifted from the background to the spotlight. The sapphires had returned, and they had chosen their bearer. It was the culmination of weeks of turmoil, doubt, and whispered resentment. Yet as Sophie stood before the cameras, surrounded by dignitaries and watched by millions, it was as if she had finally accepted not just the jewels but everything that came with them. Her expression betrayed none of the pain she had endured, no trace of the betrayal, no echo of Anne's words, no shadow of Catherine's quiet test, just calm, poise, and beneath it a defiant sense of truth. The public reacted in waves, awe, confusion, celebration, protest. Some called it courageous, others calculated. The Sapphire Matriarch One tabloid blared, as if anointing her with a new title altogether. Another asked bluntly, "Why Sophie?" The Queen's choice was still debated, but Sophie's act had sealed it, she had made it real. In accepting the sapphires publicly, she had forced the royal family to reckon with the late Queen's unspoken decree. Even King Charles, who had remained pointedly silent through the entire ordeal, offered a rare gesture, a quiet blessing before the ceremony, witnessed by only a few insiders. No words exchanged, just a nod. Was it an olive branch, a final concession, or a reluctant approval, born not of agreement but inevitability? From that day forward, Sophie's role changed. She was no longer just the loyal wife of the youngest son. She was no longer the woman who stood behind the great figures of monarchy. She became a symbol, a living embodiment of the Queen's personal authority, one that transcended protocol and cut through centuries of silent rules. But symbols, no matter how beautifully adorned, are rarely left unchallenged. And behind the palace doors, unease simmered. Those who had once assumed succession by proximity now found themselves rethinking everything. The Queen had made her choice quietly, but its echoes now roared through the very foundations of the House of Windsor. Not everyone saw Sophie's rise as noble. Some saw it as opportunistic, others as disruptive. New alliances began forming in whispers. Plans shifted. And while the public applauded or speculated, within the palace, a different energy emerged, one that suggested the story wasn't over. That the sapphires, long thought to be dormant, had awoken something deeper, something political, something dangerous. Sophie had accepted her place, but in doing so, she had unknowingly taken a seat at a table far more treacherous than she had ever imagined. And as the sapphires catch the light with every step Sophie takes, one question still lingers in the shadows. In the royal game of legacy, is inheritance a gift or a warning? Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.